you want someone, I think, in a relationship that you can spar with. And it's partly because you have hard problems to solve. And if the person that you're with isn't willing to put forward their opinion, then you only have half the cognitive power that you would otherwise have. And hopefully you find someone who's interestingly different from you, like not so different that you can't communicate, and you have to be careful of that, but interestingly different, and then hopefully they have the ability and the will to express their opinion. Then your interest stays heightened, and there has to be that tension in a relationship. People think, well, I want to get along perfectly with my partner. It's like, no, you probably don't. You just get bored, and then you go looking for trouble. And so you want a little bit of trouble in the relationship, and a little bit of mystery, and a little bit of combativeness, and the ability to exchange opinions forthrightly. And I trust her, which is a huge element. I mean, when we finally did decide to get together permanently, we were both in our later 20s. And, one of the things that I had learned by that point and insisted to her about was that we had to tell each other the truth. And she took to that wholeheartedly, and for better and for worse, because truths can be harsh. Well, if I tell my wife that she looks good in an outfit, she knows that I mean it. Sometimes, she'll say, do you like this? And I'll tell her that I don't. I actually like her sense of style a lot, so it turns out that 90% of the time it's pretty easy for me to say, look, I think you look great, and mean it. And, she's a fairly harsh standard bearer too. Like she's insisted that I stay in whatever reasonable physical shape I happen to be in. That was something that she's very demanding of. And I would say that it's the same from my side. And we've been good at negotiating, which is, what do you want from a partner fundamentally? What do you want and need? I mean, the first thing is that, well, hopefully, you, like I said, you're blessed with the fact that you find each other attractive. And I think it's very difficult for the relationship to begin or proceed or sustain itself without that. But having that, then what do you want? Well, you want someone that you can trust. You want someone that you can build a view of the future with. And you want someone that you can negotiate with. And that's very hard to negotiate with people, because they have to tell you what they think. They have to know what they want or figure it out. They have to tell you what they want. They have to be satisfied when they get what they want, which is also a very difficult thing to manage. And you have to continually update that, because your life goes through different stages. All romantic interaction should be spontaneous. It's like, well, if that's your theory, then you might as well just give up right now if you're going to get married, because the only reason you can think that is because you don't have enough responsibility to make romantic entanglement virtually impossible. And what happens when you're married, especially when you have little kids, is that, and you both have a job, let's say, is you're so busy that the probability that you're going to find time for spontaneous mutual interaction decreases to zero. And so if that's what you're hoping for, then you're never going to have it. And so what you have to do is you have to make time for each other. And if you're dating, when you're establishing a relationship, well, you put some effort into it. You decide that you're going to go out for dinner, and you dress up to some degree, and you try to present yourself to each other in some halfway mutually acceptable manner. And you hope that there's going to be a positive consequence of that you're going to find each other attractive. But then people somehow think that once they're married, that the same amount of effort isn't necessary, and that's wrong. I would say more effort is necessary on the same front, and you have to think it through. It's like, if you don't want to be bitter about the intimate element of your relationship, how much time do you have to spend together each week? And my rule of thumb, sort of derived from clinical observations, is that you need to spend 90 minutes a week with your partner talking. And that means you're telling each other about your life and staying in touch, so that you each know what the other is up to. And you're discussing what needs to be done to keep the household running smoothly. And you're laying out some mutually acceptable vision of how the next week or the next months are going to go together, right? So that keeps your narratives locked together like the strands in a rope. You need that for 90 minutes or you drift apart. And you need to spend intimate time together at least once a week, and probably more like twice. And that has to be negotiated. And if you don't negotiate it, and if you don't make it a priority, then it won't happen in all likelihood. And then, well, then you don't have it, and that's a catastrophe, because there's not that many things in life that are, intrinsically, what would you say, engaging and meaningful and pleasurable and also bonding, all of that. And if you let that go, then, well, part of you dies and part of the relationship dies, and well, then there's always the possibility of becoming attracted by alternative entanglements, which you would do if you had any spirit left, right? I mean, that's the thing, is if your relationship at home is entirely unsatisfying sexually, what are you supposed to do with that? Nothing? You're supposed to just bear it? I mean, in one way the answer is yes, because it's your marriage, but another way is, well, what, that's all the fight you've got in you? You're going to just let the erotic element of your life die and accept everything that goes along with that because you're not willing to cause a bit of trouble to ensure that it's maintained? And, and we're not very good at thinking these things through consciously. And people are bad at negotiating, period, as far as I can tell. But they're particularly bad at negotiating things that are deeply private. How much do you want your partner to know about you anyways? It takes a lot of trust to have a real conversation about what you need and want.
We've got a hypothesis that we're still working out that's supported to some degree by the relevant literature. So imagine that you're looking for a stable partner, right? So you might think, well, what do you want in a stable partner? And at least in principle, one of the things you don't want is too much mismatch between you and that person on the 5 fundamental dimensions. So for example, if you're really extroverted and you have a really introverted partner, you're going to engage in continual conflict about how much social activity the two of you should subject yourself to. And it's very, very difficult for people who widely differ on those dimensions to come to consensus, because it's not just a matter of opinion, right? It's really a matter of, if you're looking at extremes, of really different types of people. And the thing about introverts is they just don't enjoy large-scale social interaction that much. One-on-one they're often fine, but in a group they don't like that, and it tires them out. Whereas a real extrovert, it's like you isolate them and they just wither on the vine, because a huge part of what actually motivates them in a positive way is tangled up with social interaction. And so if you're an agreeable person and you have a particularly disagreeable partner, you're also going to run into problems, because the agreeable person will say whatever you want, whenever, and the disagreeable person will say, well, I'd like to know what the hell you want for a change, and be much more harsh and much more demanding in the situation. And the agreeable person is going to find the disagreeable person harsh and unpleasant, and the disagreeable person is going to find the agreeable person wishy-washy and unable to stand up for themselves. And again, that's actually one of the primary sources of tension between men and women, because women tend to be higher in agreeableness than men. It's about half a standard deviation, which is quite a large difference by psychological standards. And so what that means fundamentally, just so you have some sense of how large an effect that is that if you have a group of men and women and you pick out random pairs, the woman is going to be more agreeable than the man 60% of the time. So that's not an overwhelming proportion, but it's reliable, and it's quite large by psychological standards. So there's the problem with agreeableness. With conscientiousness, well, if you're conscientious, you're industrious and orderly. And orderly people seem to be sensitive to disgust. We've had a hard time specifying exactly what makes industrious people industrious, because it's hard to come up with an animal model for that sort of thing, and there's no theoretical model. But our latest idea is that industrious people find it unpleasant and unsettling to not be doing something. So it isn't so much that industriousness makes them happy or fills them with positive emotion. That would be more extroversion, right? Because extroversion is the positive emotion dimension. It's that industrious people can't stand sitting around doing nothing. And this is speculation, but human beings are obviously always engaged in the exchange of labor, especially the reciprocal exchange of labor. And you can imagine that in a community where everyone knows everyone, the people who work hard are going to be pretty irritated on a fairly chronic basis with the people who are completely unproductive. And my suspicions are that plenty of people who were completely unproductive in the history of the evolution of our species were wiped out by people who were unhappy with their lack of productivity. And so I think generally speaking, human beings have this sense of ethical obligation with regards to one another to share labor. And people who are conscientious really, really feel that. So they feel bad if they're not busily working on something that's productive all the time. And so the advantage to being with someone conscientious is, well, they're going to work like mad, but the disadvantage is they're going to work like mad. So, you know, if you're looking for a partner that you want to relax with or have fun with, or who isn't uptight, then a conscientious person is probably not a very good choice. On the other hand, if you're a conscientious person and you're living with someone who's really unconscientious, that's good because they might be able to help you relax, but you're not going to be happy with them because they don't work nearly as hard as you do. But even worse, on the orderly dimension, you know, some of you have had roommates and maybe you're more orderly than your roommate. What does it mean? It means you're annoyed by mess before they are. And you don't have to be annoyed by mess much before your less orderly roommate for you to be the one that's always running around picking things up. And so actually one of the things that's emerged from the psychometric analysis is that women are slightly more orderly than men. And I suspect that has something to do with the, what would you call it, inequitable distribution of housework. Because even if imagine that your proclivity is to be triggered by disorder 25 seconds before your partner's. Well, you're going to end up, it doesn't take much difference for you to be the one that's always concerned about the mess first. So anyways, and so if you're a really orderly person and you live with a disorderly person, well, good luck getting along with them. They're going to regard you as like uptight and over concerned with details and, well, and unwilling to relax, that's for sure. And they're going to regard you as, well, just a bloody mess. And how can anyone possibly live with someone like you? So another reason why it's useful to understand your personality is because I think it gives you a better crack at finding someone that you can actually live with over the long run. And we don't know what the optimal, I don't think you want to live with someone who's exactly like you, because then both of you have the same strengths and weaknesses. And there's a bit of a problem there, right? Because maybe an agreeable person can use a bit of a disagreeable person around them to balance each other out, and vice versa, right? So we don't understand the optimal balance for long-term thriving in a relationship, but I think we do understand the fact that if you're too different in your traits, where you're different is going to constitute a chronic source of conflict.